Houston Texans managed to accomplish something that every team tries to do, but always fails, and that's have a successful rebuild. If you go back to 2021, the Texans were in a dire situation. They had this quarterback that they thought was going to be their guy in Deshaun Watson, no longer present with the team. They had a horrible previous year in 2020, but they didn't have their own draft pick to pick somebody at number 3 overall, which is where it was slotted. And then they were starting Davis Mills at the quarterback position, a third-round pick. A great backup, but not a starter long-term or even short-term in the NFL. But instead of overreacting and making a huge, colossal mess out of it, trying to address the QB position like a lot of teams do, they took a step back, they took a deep breath, and they assessed the situation. Instead of making gigantic mistakes that they would really regret, they just attacked the here and the now, the moment. And a prime example is how they proceeded with Laramie Tunsil and also the 2022 draft. In 2022, they had the number 3 overall pick. They were quarterback desperate. Davis Mills just led them to a 4-13 record. But instead of overdrafting Kenny Pickett or Malik Willis or trading back in the first round to acquire some capital and then drafting them, they said, let's just take the best player available. Derek Stingley. Worked out pretty well. Top 5 cornerback in the NFL. They have this all-pro left tackle on Laramie Tunsil and the prime of his career, but yet they weren't going anywhere with these big, bad, losing records. A lot of teams in their situation would have said, let's try and recoup some value back. We traded 2 firsts for him. Let's try and get something. They said, no, he's a cornerstone player. Let's keep him on our roster. Then you fast forward to the 2023 NFL draft. And the Texans had the number 2 overall pick and the number 13 overall pick. At number 2, instead of banking off of athleticism, banking off of all these physical traits of quarterbacks, they simply took the QB that they had the most belief in, the one that showed the best skill set. It wasn't purely based on potential. It was based off of, is he good or is he bad? CJ Stroud had the best accuracy and a very strong arm in this draft class. And they went forward and they took him. And then with a 3rd overall pick, they traded up to acquire it. And the reason why is most teams, again, would sit back, relax, and sit on their hands and say, well, we have 13th. Let's just keep our capital and let's try to acquire someone because this could be a learning stage, a young team. They said, no, we like Will Anderson Jr. a lot. Let's mortgage our quote-unquote future for him and acquire him. And they did that, and it turned out to be a really good decision. Now, people might say, well, these were lucky decisions, but in reality, over a course of a couple of years, it shows that it was the right mindset in knowing how to build a proper team. A lot of teams would panic in trying to acquire a QB and rush him because at the end of the day, QBs sell jerseys. QBs are the most important position on the field. But the Texans didn't let it fluster them. They were willing to wait a year or 2 for things to develop the perfect way. And it did. They acquired CJ Stroud. They have premium players at premium positions, left tackle, defensive end, cornerback. They developed the players currently on their roster from the past few years, like Nico Collins. And bang, it all worked. In CJ Stroud's rookie year, they went 10-7 and won a wild card game. Instead of just sitting on their hands again like most teams would, saying, well, it can only go up from here because they're going to be older, more experienced, they said, let's try and contend now. Let's make moves to win now. And that's what they did. They signed Danielle Hunter to a 2-year deal. They signed Joe Mixon. They traded for Stephon Diggs. And they acquired key contributors to help this team be really, really good. And it's paid off thus far. They're 6-2. And they're on top of the division, and they look like one of the best teams in the NFL. But not only did they make the right moves at the right times, they were also very calculated with their decision. I think the prime example of this is their offseason moves this season by acquiring Danielle Hunter, Stephon Diggs, Joe Mixon. These 3 players are hugely important to their success, but they're also understanding, the Texans, when I say the Texans are also very understanding of, well, we don't want to be tied down with these guys if things don't go the right way. So they signed them or acquired them for low costs on short deals. Daniel Hunter, 2-year deal. You can get out of it next season if it didn't work out. Joe Mixon signed to a 3-year extension for $27 million. So he's making about $9 million a year, but those next couple of years, the last year, is not guaranteed money. So you can move out of that deal after this season if need be. Stephon Diggs, he's a free agent after this season. The Texans are calculated with every single move, and they know when to make the right decisions and when to not rush the process. Take the Carolina Panthers, for example. The Panthers saw a QB in Bryce Young that they loved, a quarterback that I think has the potential to be great. But what did they do? They rushed the process, and they put him in a situation where he was never going to succeed. You put CJ Stroud in that situation, he's going to struggle to succeed. When Bryce Young was acquired by the Carolina Panthers, their next best player offensively was a 33-year-old wide receiver in Adam Thielen. Teams over and over and over try and rebuild fast, but never calculate it. And that's why the Texans are a model franchise in the NFL. And we've seen teams already, just a year after it all worked out, I'd say after that 2023 season, we've seen teams copycat them. A team that sticks out to me as a big copycat is the Washington Commanders. The Commanders could have had a fire sale last year at the trade deadline, a fire sale this offseason. They could have moved off of Terry McLaurin, a 28-year-old wide receiver. They could have moved off of Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne. But they said, yes, we're going to be bad now, but let's provide a solid foundation around a future young QB in Jaden Daniels. And so Daniels walked in the situation. He's 6-2, is on fire because the Commanders provided him with a top wide receiver in Terry McLaurin, a dynamic backfield in Brian Robinson. They also acquired a young receiving back in Austin Eckler. They brought in some veterans like the linebacker position, Bobby Wagner, right? And they addressed it accordingly, just like the Texans did. So teams should never be rushed to rebuild, because when they rush the rebuild process, they just happen to be in it longer. So if you're an NFL team and you need to rebuild, look at the Texans model, because I'd say it worked out pretty darn good.